I think that's kind of the most important thing is just to make it relevant. I think the mistake folks make is just trying to like adapt existing like comm streams for parents. I don't think that's going to work like terribly well. And I think you're probably better off just trying to take a step back and understanding what parents care about, what they're concerned about, and ideally making that really specific to your institution.
What happens when you put parents first, not just as influencers, but as active partners in the college decision process? Joining me today is Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships360 and a former admissions and financial aid leader. He's reviewed over 10,000 applications, led a merit scholarship program, and served on a financial aid appeals committee. So he knows what families are really looking for. Welcome to the application, Will.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Allison. Really excited to be here.
Well, I wanted to kick it off with kind of a big question for you. What's the one thing you've learned from parents that totally changed the way you think about enrollment?
It's kind of basic, but just how influential parents can actually be in their student or child's admissions process. I think about my own college experience. I'm a first generation college student, and I wanted to attend a private out of state college where with a very high sticker price that was intimidating for my family. My mom played a really big role in helping my family understand just how that could be an affordable option for me. I still remember her. I went to Wake Forest, calling the financial aid office at Wake Forest with lots of little questions just about my FAFSA and CSS profile and helping to understand what work study might look like, understanding what like how manageable my student loan debt would be, which was just a huge huge help for me as I was navigating a very stressful process. I think that regarding the financial part of college admissions, it can be kind of just a little intimidating or even seem like borderline inappropriate for students to be prying too much into their family's financial situation. And I think that's where parents can really play a big role in, being advocates for their students and, stewarding that part of the process.
I always think there's such a huge opportunity for colleges to help parents have that conversation with their student. It's not an easy one to have about where are our limits, where are our comforts when it comes to the cost of college, what's going to be our piece, if any, what's going to be your piece, what's that impact going to look like? That's hard. That's a conversation that typically anyone has had with their teenager who's looking at colleges, right? So I feel like there's this opportunity for colleges perhaps to even help parents establish that conversation with their student.
I'm thinking right now of a specific family at Kenyon. They came in during one visit program to sort of like personally appeal their financial aid package. And this person's daughter was really set at Kenyon at this point. They got accepted. They, were at the visit program, having a great time. And Kenyon just was not an affordable option for the family. And there was nothing that we could do as a financial aid office. And I just felt so bad for the student and for the family, but also at the same time thought that this is probably a conversation that could have been had earlier on before the student got their, had their heart set on Kenyon. And yeah, I think I completely agree. It's not like a fun conversation, but college is a very expensive, complicated thing to pay for. And it's, it's not just the type of thing that, you get in and you'll make it work. Like that's like kind of an irresponsible way of thinking about it. And I think I think they're doing their children a disservice, their students a disservice if, they're just like, go ahead and like take out like, a bunch of student loans, go ahead and, attend this school, like even though we really can't afford it, and it's going to put big strain on our family.
So we're talking a lot about how the parent often takes the lead when it comes to the financial side of the cost of college. How would you say parents are actually influencing and shaping the student's college decision?
Yeah, I think it's even going like back farther, earlier on in high school. I think it's really interesting to think about like all if you really like dissect all the different ways parents like bring their own impressions and perspectives and influence that. So like some parents went to college themselves and have like preconceived notions about those colleges that they're bringing to the table. They have family members, colleagues that have attended different colleges. They're bringing all those opinions to their student. When the college mail starts coming in and it's sitting on the kitchen table or in the student's inbox, they're going to be providing feedback on that. Even thinking about like I know we were talking about visit programs earlier. A lot of times parents are going to be the ones taking time off work, driving, paying for flights, gas, hotels, arranging those like spring break your summer college, trips as juniors and sophomores. So they definitely have a say with, not, some students are probably doing a lot of that themselves, but I think for most students, parents are going to be very involved with that. And then in the actual application process, I sort of had a front row seat to that as a school counselor, where I saw, parents were, influential as far as providing feedback on college lists, helping students with essays, and then, ultimately like making those final decisions in, April, May of the senior year, when all the acceptances had come in.
I feel like this is an evolution in parenting as well. You're a parent, I'm a parent. I think how we parent today might be different than previous generations. Actually, I know it to be true. I don't know if you've read The Anxious Generation, but part of what they talk about in that book is, of course, the cell phone use and the social media, but also our style of parenting that we're very focused on our children, right? There's not a lot of unstructured time. Well, the unstructured time is online, which is an interesting thing, but in person, there's not a lot of unstructured time. We're really structured in that way. So, of course, the parents would be involved in the college piece of it as they have been for the student's entire childhood.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that. I actually got to see Jonathan Haidt do a talk on that here in New York, which is really cool. And yeah, my daughter's only 2 months old, so still a little bit of time before thinking about college admissions. But yeah, it really, I think is very makes you think, and I think it's good for parents to have a seat at the table, to be involved in their, child's process. I think that's a good thing to have a support system, but I do sometimes have concerns that, this is sort of depriving students of an opportunity to be independent and self-sufficient. And it's such a tricky balance, just because I think in a lot of ways, college, first time for so many, for most young people to be away from home on their own. It's, a generally independent decision that they're making about the future of their lives, like, what they might like to do as a career or vocation, the type of location they might like to spend the next 4 years at. So I think it's a really tricky balance, just because practically, parents are going to be the buyers of the product while the students are the users.
Well, again, maybe this is an opportunity for those of us at the institution side. Can we be giving advice to parents about not just how to have that financial conversation, but how to play the right role for their student in the college search process? Because there is a growth opportunity for the student, as you say, if it's not completely controlled and regimented and structured by the parent, and you let them find their way. It's sort of that first tiptoe into adulthood in a way. There's opportunity there.
Yeah, I think for so many parents, they're looking for ways to be involved, but I think sometimes they just don't know how to be
How? Where?
involved in, yeah, exactly where to start. And I think colleges, just if there are touch points to, be involved in a healthy, constructive way, like extending that invitation can make a huge difference.
One of the things that's a huge challenge right now is generating student information and inquiries, right? So we've seen that some of the typical sources where we've gotten student information, those are on the decline, or because of privacy issues, we don't get as much information. It feels like there could be such an opportunity here, perhaps to start with the parent first, because they might be the first ones actually thinking about the college situation and where might be good fits for my child, and what should I think about. And I know that you all started collecting parent and family contact info right in the inquiry phase, and you were seeing a really strong opt-in rate. So one, I want to have your view on what are the different ways where we can get parent information, maybe even before the student information, and then what are the opportunities there to build trust with parents?
Yeah, I know that like, every state has different data privacy laws. I know that's something our team has spent a lot of time on. Like just like this year in January, New Jersey's went into effect. In July, I think it's Tennessee and Minnesota are going to go into effect. So it's a really like complicated, like shifting landscape that like disproportionately impacts like minors data. So we're definitely excited about parent data. On our end, we launched this in January to include this as part of our student experience. So we're seeing like 60% of students include that as part of their profile on Scholarships 360. And I think it's just a natural touch point at the intersection of like higher ed and finances, where parents are, kind of comfortable. And for us, we already knew that parents were using Scholarships 360. It's kind of funny. Sometimes we'd see, parents like writing
Yeah.
in as their students, which is just the other day
And
that happened.
at least once a year, we get an email from a parent who says we've got their student's info wrong because we're emailing the student messages to the parent. And I'm like, oh, no, we didn't get it wrong. When you filled out the application and the autofill put you in and you didn't catch it, it's like yes, sometimes the parents are there sort of acting as the student, right?
Yeah, no, it's a very funny thing. I always find the like we are going to college,
Yeah.
sort of explanation also always gives me a chuckle. I definitely think we're going to see more vendors, companies entering this space, thinking about parent engagement. I think that, if you're looking at more traditional types of like marketing, like on, Facebook or something, that there's more doors that are opened up if you're, not like targeting students who are minors. And I think just creating more of like, more touch points for, supporting parents. I think one of the big opportunities is thinking about this early on in the process, like creating some resources for like sophomore parents, like a checklist or something. Like I think that would be a really great way just to add value to those parents, and also, potentially generate like more, parent inquiries for your institution. So extending that invitation, I think makes a big difference.
It's really smart because a lot of the traditional ways where we're getting sources of information don't include the parent information. We just have the student information, and we can just do things like email the student. And we know that students aren't necessarily on their email, right? But parents are using their email for their everyday lives. So it feels like a really, really important audience. But I think what intimidates people about this idea of sort of building a parent first strategy, or maybe not parent first, but a parent emphasized strategy or parent focused strategy, is now I've got to build a whole new communication plan, right? But do you have any ideas around some lower lift ways that parents can get incorporated, or a communication plan can get built for them that aren't so comprehensive? Like we can just start this. We don't have to have the entire 3 years built out on day one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think even taking a step further back, like as building a company where it's all about like talking to your customers, and I think in a lot of ways, like parents are part of that, like set of customers as a college, and that could just be trying to be more intentional about talking to parents at admitted students programs, at on tours, visit programs, panels, parents who are just calling in with questions, and just like there's a way of trying to gather some of that intelligence. I think that can be really great. At Kenyon College, where I worked, one of my favorite initiatives was on tours sometimes. We would separate parents and students on the tour. And of course, like tour guides are your eyes and ears on campus for gathering intel. And it was a great experience for students. They got to ask the questions they didn't want to ask in front of mom or dad. And then for parents, they would also get to ask the questions where their student wouldn't be rolling their eyes, but just provided a really like great way of getting the pulse on what parents care about. And I think that's kind of the most important thing, is just to make it relevant. I think the mistake folks make is just trying to like adapt existing like comm streams for parents. I don't think that's going to work like terribly well. And I think you're probably better off just trying to take a step back and understanding what parents care about, what they're concerned about, and ideally making that really specific to your institution.
I want to get into messaging next, but for everyone who's listening, if you're enjoying these insights, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And you can also sign up for my newsletter at AllisonTercio.com, where I always include links to the latest episodes, as well as lots of other great content marketing and thought leadership from higher education marketing. But let's go back to the show. I want to get into this idea of what will make content, whether it's an email or a resource or an ad, what's going to resonate with parents well. So if we're going to do this, what's actually going to matter? What are they actually going to open? What are they going to read? What will they act on? Let's start from a solid place.
Yeah, I think starting with what's relevant and what they are, what they're concerned about. I was reading the 2024 EAB parent survey, and one of the really interesting things was all of the top concerns for parents were cost and affordability related. So it was college cost, scholarships, financial aid, student loan debt. So I think that provides a really like great, opportunity for engagement. What I love about like scholarships, financial aid, there's, forms, there's deadlines. It's really actionable. It could also be like net price calculators. It could be scholarship estimators. There's a lot of ways of putting like tools, that are aligned with transparency front and center. I think that this, gives parents sort of allows them to take action, gives them permission to do that, and also just like shows that your institution's one that's trying to build trust, is being really transparent. And then I think, yeah, going back to trying to understanding your like parent community, there's probably like ways of like doing that messaging that is going to resonate like more with your school versus the institution and down the road.
Well, when it comes to financial aid and affordability, there's a lot of demystifying that needs to happen too. So there is clearly opportunity there. What are the ways, and I'm sure you're all working on this at Scholarships 360. So what are some of the ways that we can all, whether it's partnering or on the institution side, how can we demystify financial aid and scholarships for parents specifically?
Yeah, I mean, that's like our number one for colleges, number one part of our mission. I think we see on the student side so many students and families just like not considering colleges because of sticker price. I think the really good news is that and I guess like that this is also the complicated news is if you look at like discount rates, for instance, I think and it always takes me a second, the NACUBO
Yeah, yeah.
like survey,
Nakubo, I think. Yeah.
NACUBO,
Yeah.
yeah. Discount rate was like 56% last year for private colleges, which means that, their average family is going to be paying less than half of the sticker price, which, that is great for, that means for most families, there's going to be financial aid scholarships available. And I think really leaning into that type of messaging and just doing that earlier, doing that in a more direct way. One example, there's a partner I'm thinking of. It's a highly selective Questbridge school, and their campaigns with us were all focused on how applying is affordable. So, for example, sharing information about fee waivers, but then also just explaining their different initiatives on like meeting 100% of demonstrated need, their no loan policy, helping to educate families on what those things mean. Again, I think it can also be just like tools like the net price calculator, scholarship estimators. I think really, really leading with that can just help, demystify this, make it more clear, and help parents have a better understanding of cost earlier on. And I think on the scholarship and financial aid front, like I always think that schools are using, the scholarships, financial aid, those are like wonderful things that students are receiving when they're admitted. This could also just be a way of like using that essentially as marketing like earlier on in the process. And wouldn't it be great for students to learn that they likely qualify for scholarship earlier on? I think that's one of the big reasons why, and thinking about direct admissions, the like scholarship component of it is so common with so many of these programs, just because it's a great way to get students more excited and also help them understand the price they might be paying sooner in their senior year.
Yeah, we have a merit scholarship calculator on our website through Halda, and it gets a lot of input. So it's clearly top of mind, and I can kind of tell that it's parents who are inputting that info quite often as the student to sort of see where their student would land. But what do you think the impact or the potential impact of focusing on parents can be for higher ed institutions?
Yeah, I think just getting allies for just this really, really critical stakeholder, ideally earlier on. I think at the end of the day, parents are going to play that critical role when they're students making final decisions, and I think that there's just a ton of upside for just like in getting more deposits. I think on the sort of student success retention side of things, I think you need to reapply for students receiving financial aid, or even just paying their tuition bills. They need to do that every year. So you're empowering parents to be savvier financial consumers of higher education. And I think that just is going to be a big benefit to you, just as far as students not melting, students being retained at a higher clip, which for most schools now, continuing to meet like tuition revenue goals is a huge priority. So.
Absolutely. And where do you see all this heading, the parent involvement in the college search process, especially as parenting and families are evolving? And then we have all of this AI available too that could more personalize the process. Where's this all going, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think my gut is that parents are going to continue to be more involved. I do have some like concerns over the like proper balance between the, being supportive and involved while also, allowing students to make decisions on their own, to be self-sufficient, to be independent. I think that colleges can play a really critical way in sort of shaping that conversation. I also think all this is just going to be fueled by this tailwind of like these data privacy laws that are
Yeah.
going to make it harder to reach, students at the prospect inquiry phase. And I think that parent first strategies are going to continue to become, more and more common in the marketplace, and a way for colleges just to, begin, conversations in a, more, in a safer legal way.
Yeah, and Jenny Petty, I think, coined the term from University of Montana of the search cliff. We talk about the student cliff, the enrollment cliff, but there's this search cliff happening because of the access to information. So considering parents and how you build out that strategy is a really proactive thing for all of us to be thinking about. Will, thank you so much. This was a lot of great real world insight.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, it was really great to be here and to share some of this. I really appreciate you having me on.
And if people would like to connect with you or Scholarships 360, what's the best way?
Yeah, so you can check us out, scholarships360.org. And I'm on LinkedIn, just Will Geiger, Scholarships 360. That's probably my primary social media channel for posting and sharing insights. We'd be always happy to chat with anyone about anything, at the intersection of financial and higher education.
If you're listening and you haven't thought about your parent communication strategy lately, this is the sign to do it and to share it with the rest of your team that works on their parent communications. Until next time, keep testing, keep learning, and keep putting people at the center of your strategies.